Hello and welcome everyone. Good to see you. Whoops, there we are. My name is Sam Peterson and we're going to be doing the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge today. So we're here with week 2, I believe challenge 6 for the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. And today's challenge is going to be tileable textures. Before we get into that, I just want to say hey to everyone. Good to see you all in the chat. I saw Chad in there, Valdair, Bruce. I saw Wade and Ted in there. Robert, Jennifer, Andreas, General Kenobi. Good to see everyone. Sean, Frank, hello. Ferry, what's up? Good to see y'all. Welcome on in for another Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. I'm excited to do this one. This is kind of a fun topic for me. But before we dive into it, let me show you how to join these challenges over on the landing page. So if you go to behance.net/challenge/Photoshop, you will get here to the landing page and you can click the big blue button up at the top and it'll say, hi, take the challenge. That's a good way to register for these, get notifications when they're revealed. And if you scroll down, you can see all the challenges so far and you'll see that some of them are still locked. These will be unlocked each day. If you are watching the Creative Encore, and you'll know that by looking down at the bottom, the title will say Creative Encore, that means you are watching a replay of this. And all these challenges will already be unlocked and you can do any of them that you like. So we have 2 weeks of live and then 2 weeks of replays. So it's basically a month total for you to work on these challenges. Gives you a little bit of extra time. So just keep that in mind if you're watching this. The chat is live, but this will be a replay if it says Creative Encore. But otherwise, this is live. So let's get into today's challenge. This is going to be tileable textures. And actually, before I do that, let's talk about the Discord real quick, because this is where you can post all your challenges. So any of these challenges that you do over the next month for this set of 9 challenges, you can check it out over on the left-hand side. You'll see challenge under feedback, and that's where you can post the current challenges. You can get feedback. And if you post anything that's like a personal design that's not related, you can do design other. There's the ask a question section. If you scroll down here under advice, lots of great sections. Check it out. You can see everything everyone's posting. Agilos is posting the pattern one here and the letter one that we did yesterday. This turned out great. I think I saw Frank's design here. He's got an animation too, which is really cool. Just a little heads up. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but if you click on any animated images or anything like that, Discord compresses it quite a bit, but if you click open original down at the bottom, you'll always get the full resolution opened up in a browser. So just a little tip. Some great pattern design challenge by Hugh here. I like it. That turned out really nicely. The values read perfectly. Yeah, so great designs, everyone. I've really been enjoying seeing all this. We have Ted in the chat, who is a mentor. We got Valdair. So a lot of people giving feedback. I encourage you to give feedback as well if you have any input you'd like to give. But check it out. This is a great place to share your designs for these challenges. So without further ado, let's jump into Photoshop. You're trying to scroll from Sam's screen. Oh yeah, I just remembered. Yeah, moving myself away from that layers panel. All right, so first off, we're going to be doing tileable textures today. So I like to work on a square canvas. You don't need to, really, but it makes sense to me in the realm of tileable textures. So what we're trying to do today is something along the lines of kind of like hand-painted textures you see for video games, or not even necessarily hand-painted, but just like tileable textures that you might see for video games. And creating things like that is really easy in Photoshop. I think today, I mean, you can do like a wall texture. You can really do whatever like repeating pattern texture you can think of. But, you know, a couple things that come to mind for me were like maybe a stone wall or like a cobblestone pathway. So I thought kind of a cobblestone floor texture would be neat to do today. So if you do Command or Control, Alt or Option I, little hotkey for the image size, you can see I'm at 2000 by 2000 pixels. I think that works pretty well for this, and that's what I'm going to use. So first off, I'm going to create a new layer, and just do Command or Control Shift N. That'll create my new layer. Well, I shouldn't name that. We'll just do pattern. It's going to be our, rock shapes, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the lasso tool, which is hotkey L, you can see it here up at the top, and I'm just going to click and drag and create some organic rock-like shapes. I have this mid-tone gray, a little bit less than mid-tone selected, very desaturated. And you can basically just use this lasso tool, and why I like it is because the imperfection of this automatically creates some nice organic shapes like that. But the thing is, when you're doing this, you have to know, how does it repeat, right? How are you going to know that this is a pattern that is able to repeat? So Photoshop makes it super easy, and we touched on this on Friday a little bit. I kind of showed you how to define a pattern, but we're going to deal with that whole workflow a lot more today. So if you go to View, you can go to Pattern Preview. And if you turn that on, you can just click OK. And now it shows you what that repeating pattern will look like. You can zoom out, see what it looks like tiny. You can zoom in, see what it looks like a bit more. So this is really, really helpful to create repeating patterns on the fly. For example, I can actually select outside of this. And you'll see that it cuts off, but it repeats on the other side. So if I fill that, it fills the whole thing. And it kind of automatically makes sure that those seams are going to be repeating. So we'll try this again, and we'll just fill this up. I'm going to do this kind of quickly. I'm just pressing G for my fill bucket. I'm using the fill bucket tool here, hotkey G, and the lasso tool, and I'm just kind of cycling between G and L for lasso and this. And you can paint too. You can use a brush, the B tool, or hotkey B. And you can just paint across things too. And you'll see it repeats all over, which is really helpful. But I like the lasso tool. I feel like it gives me some control, but still gives me a nice organic shape. So let's fill the remainder of this up. I don't want like very big spaces between my shapes. And I also don't want shapes that are too out of the ordinary, because if you put all these big shapes and you put one small shape, it kind of becomes apparent when you zoom out that thing stands out as a repetitive aspect. So I like filling it in with some smaller stones as well. But I think we'll keep them fairly large. Fill that in. I don't like how sharp that corner is, so I'm just gonna get a eraser, hard eraser. Flow's 100, opacity's 100, and I can just chop that off if I want. All right, we got a couple more spots to fill, so let's go do that. And actually, we got a small space here. Let's just try to fill it. See if that becomes too repetitive. Maybe we can fit in another couple small ones here. Oh, whoops. So it didn't fill in that side. I can always just click the other end. It's good to check both sides to see. And then let's fill in this space that we're missing here. It's not bad. I'll create a little rock in some of these in-between areas. That looks pretty good to me. So from here, what we want to do, you can kind of check it, zoom out, and I think the small rocks are standing out, but that's fine. We can go ahead and do a bevel and emboss effect. So if you double click that rock shapes layer that we just created, you'll get the layer styles panel. And if you go to Bevel and Emboss, you can create a bit of a three-dimensional effect that's going to kind of sell this dimension and make it appear a little bit more realistic. So if you have the default settings, which I do right now, I'm probably going to want to size it up a bit so the rocks appear a bit thicker off the ground, but you'll see that it's really soft. And that's because we have this smooth edge. So I'm going to try chisel hard. And I think that will give us more of a rocky look. So I'm going to scale that down. And I think somewhere around 20 looks good. Depends how tall you want this to be. I don't want it to be too tall. You know, pathway stones are probably going to be fairly worn down. Maybe like 17 looks good. And then from here, you can do something pretty cool. In the Bevel and Emboss panel, you'll see some drop options here. So texture, if we click that, it'll actually bevel and emboss a texture pattern. So I'm going to click OK on that and show you what you can do with this. So if you get a rock texture like this, you can actually go to Edit and Define Pattern. I have to have that selected. Define Pattern. And that's what we did on Friday, if you remember that. So if you want, we'll actually be using this in two ways. So the color will matter in one way and it won't in the other. I'm going for like a cool bluish, grayish stone. So I just took a hue and saturation layer here and I cranked down the saturation, cranked down the hue to a cooler color, and we get some more natural like cool stone color, and I define that as a pattern as well. So if we go back here, double click on our layer to get to the layer styles, you'll see that the texture is applying this leaf texture that we have. So we can scroll down to our defined patterns. This is what we did with the, that floral pattern is what we did with the fabric challenge, the fabric pattern challenge. And we did some polka dots too. So you can see how it's actually taking these patterns and using them in like a beveled and embossed way. But if I take the rock one that I have, we get a cool rock texture. Now this is a bit much for me. The depth is something you can play with. The scale is going to stretch or compress the texture. I think it's pretty good at 100, so I'm going to leave it. But the depth is actually going to show like how much of that texture is really popping off. I think it looks really ugly when you go too high like that. It doesn't look like stone. But I think something fairly low around 10 looks pretty good. Now 10's a bit too low. I think something like 13 or 14 looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. We'll keep that. So before we click OK and we accept that, you can actually do pattern overlay as well. The default settings will be different than mine. It probably looks like that when you first do it. Or if you pick the warmer tone one. So you can get a lot of different looks depending on the photo texture you use. But I like the cool rock, and I'm actually going to change this to multiply. And opacity, usually it's up quite. I think it may be default at 100, but I think it looks pretty good lowered. So maybe around 60, that kind of has a natural look to it. So I'm going to click OK there. Now, the issue that you may or may not have noticed is that we get these ugly seams because the edge of the canvas is actually right here. We still have it in View Pattern Preview. We can turn that off at any time and check it. And the way that Bevel and Emboss works is it, you know, cuts it off on the edge of the canvas too. But this is a fairly easy fix. If we go back to View Pattern Preview, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. And I'm just going to have this backed up just in case I need it later. So we have this one. And I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this layer. So rasterize layer style, if you right click on the layer, you can do that. Yeah, layer styles do really cool things. Like I've played, you know, with them. I think we've done a challenge before with text in the previous DCC. There's just so much like dimension and cool things you can do with them. So let's see. I rasterized there, or my rocks there. I have the backup just in case I need it. I don't think I will, but I want to get rid of these seams. And you can tell the ones at the top and the bottom are the most apparent because of the direction of the lighting for the bevel and emboss effect. They exist on the left as well, but it's a lot more subtle. So I'm going to get rid of some of these, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to get rid of all of them. We don't have time, so I'm just going to select them and show you how you can do this. And I'll just do a couple of the worst ones. So I'm going to select my clone stamp tool, which is the hotkey S, if you wanted to use that. And what I can do is press Alt or Option and just select an area of rock that we can sample. Turn this brush a bit bigger, and I can paint over both sides. So I can actually paint down past the pattern preview. I'm going to just, whoops. I'm going to select again with Alt or Option to reset where it's sampling the pattern from and just complete that. See, I went too far, so now I got to do Alt or Option again, sample a new area that's not sampling the background. And I can press Control or Command D, and you can see how it looks in the pattern too. Right down there, that looks pretty good. There's a bit of a seam, but it looks fine to me. You can always clean that up and kind of spend a little extra time if you really want. So I'm going to go back to S, which is the hotkey for my clone stamp tool. Just select the area. And I like to resample so I'm not going off the canvas. Like I did there, so I'm going to Control Z. And if you ever get any of these patchy areas that don't look quite right, just sample another area and try it again. It's a little bit of finessing here and there. So that looks pretty decent. We'll do a couple more. Grab this. S, hotkey. Once you get these hotkeys down, switching back and forth between tools is actually pretty fast. I'm sure anyone who's been using Photoshop for some time knows if you have a workflow that you use repeatedly, finding hotkeys for all the frequently used tools saves a ton of time. And it can make repetitive things like this pretty quick, actually. So we have a little bit in the corner there. I'll take care of that another time. We have one more thing that we haven't talked about that I want to say is these edges. You can use the clone tool and sample just like a vertical edge right here and kind of scroll up. It is tricky because these change direction so much, but honestly, for my purposes, I just switch to the brush tool and use like a hard round brush. It's just completely hard. And I'm sampling areas of color right next to what I'm covering up to make sure it's getting the right color. But you can kind of just paint over these. You can patch these up with whatever tools you like, but honestly, I do some hand-painted stuff with these types of textures anyway, so I feel like when you just sample the colors, vary it up a little bit, you can use a textured brush if you want to, you zoom out, it looks great. So if you want to clean up those weird edges, that's kind of what the method I was using. Just a small brush to patch up exactly the area that needs it, and it blends in with the rest pretty well. So I think we'll move on from there. That looks pretty good. From here, I would like to add a little bit of color variation. So we still have our rocks all in one layer. I'm going to do a new layer, Control or Command Shift N, and this is going to be our color. Now this is not a color layer. You can try different different blending modes, but I like the overlay layer for this one because we can control our value a little bit. With the color, we can only control the hue. So I'll show you how that works. I'm gonna right click my layer I just made, create clipping masks, so it clips it directly to the rocks. And then from here, you can just grab a brush you like, a textured brush, and play around with some color. So we have this set to overlay. I'll see if I can find a good color. I want to put some red. I want to put some like warm tones and some cool tones, but I don't want to go overboard. So I kind of like that. If you're using a mouse, I recommend taking your flow down quite a bit because you'll be able to get a lot more subtle marks like this that you can kind of overlap. If you're using a stylus, that doesn't really concern you, but whenever I'm using a mouse for painting, like with an airbrush or any sort of brush, I like to take the flow way down. So you can kind of erase into this and just kind of go crazy because you can see how it repeats around the stone. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to use a stylus because I can make these marks much faster than I can with the mouse. But if you use a mouse, it works great too. I've done that as well. Sometimes I'm too lazy to pick up the stylus. Just use the mouse. So that's a little color variation. I kind of like that. Some of these like rustic reddish tones. Just make sure it looks kind of even throughout all of them. And then let's try some cooler tone. Maybe just some like blues, or that's way too purple. So I'm going to desaturate it. Maybe somewhere more around the teal. Like that looks pretty good. So, rock, if you look at photos of rocks, you'll notice there's a lot of like color variation or texture. It really depends on the rock, but if you're trying to mimic a certain type of stone, you can go for those colors. But I think this just adds some nice variation. So it looks pretty cool to me. Sam uses a mouse for painting. That's a lie. I would never. I couldn't. Unless you mean with these rocks sometimes. Yeah, if it's something simple like that, I have used the mouse. But not for like my characters. So it sounds like a nightmare to me. All right, so this looks pretty good. But there's no background. That's kind of bugging me. I think we could put a background. It also looks a little dark. It's hard to tell without the context of the background. But we can add a new adjustment layer. So if you get a layer at the top, new adjustment layer. I use levels or curves all the time are always good just for boosting your values, getting them exactly where you want, because maybe it's not quite where you want. So I'm going to boost the brightness, but also boost the shadows to get more contrast. That looks pretty good. Maybe I'll boost that darkness a bit more. Just want a little bit more pop to it with those highs and lows. And this is an adjustment layer, so we can always go back to it, but I'm going to leave it for now. I think that works enough. Let's go into the background a bit. All right, so first off, before we do the background, well, actually, we can just do that now. Let's put like I kind of want like a sandy color in there. Something like that works. Kind of a desaturated tan, yellow, orange color, something like that. And what we can do to add a little bit more depth, like they belong together, is just double click on the rock shape that we created and do a drop shadow. So for my drop shadow, I think this actually looks pretty good. You can play around with the distance, the spread, and the size. You'll see that the size kind of shows how far that reaches. So I don't want it too much because it starts to look unrealistic, like the shadow wouldn't be extending that far. The spread, I don't usually play with too much because it kind of has a hard edge if you crank it up. But I think somewhere around 10 isn't too bad. And distance will show you kind of what angle it's going at. So you can tilt the angle here with this little dial. But I want it pretty much like the sun is coming straight forward in this angle. You know, this is a floor texture. So this would be like sunset or something, maybe, where the shadows would be like that. So I'm going to keep it pretty low in distance. I don't want long shadows for this effect. You can see that just adds a nice little touch of realism there. From here, let me see. You can kind of just play around. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that background. And you can just play around if you have any textured brushes. If you search Shaddy Safati brush pack, I should have had that. I can always post it in the Discord, but I should have had that ready for you guys. It's actually a great brush set. I'm gonna change the flow really low here. It's a great brush set, really low. Let's go like 5 or something, 4 or 5. And the more you kind of go over with this brush, the more it builds up. But I'm just gonna do some quick little strokes to add texture. Maybe 4 was too low. But Shaddy Safati has a brush set for digital painting that has some really great like landscape textures. So I use those sometimes for purposes like this. Just add a bit of texture. You can try playing around with just like a airbrush, which I use for a lot of things. You know, if you want to take the flow way down to that, because I'm using the mouse. Yeah, you can kind of play around and try to get more of like a sandy type of look. But what you can also do, I believe I included in the assets, is take this sand texture or any photo texture you'd like and place it over the top. Now this blending mode does not look good to me. You can cycle through the different blending modes. I think something a little bit lighter would look good. Soft light looks pretty good. Hard light's too much. Let's go with soft light. And we can take down the opacity. It's a bit too harsh. I want to keep it in the style of the rocks. Maybe like 50% or so opacity looks decent. And from here we have ourselves a pretty nice, pretty decent texture going on. Now you can go in and you can refine it. You can kind of paint on top of any of this, whether it's the sand or the rock. You can add modifications. Something I like to do sometimes is create a new layer and make it a color dodge layer and use things like the lasso tool, the airbrush, and I'll pick like a warm kind of a dark, warm, desaturated color. Color dodge, you have to be careful. If you pick a lot of color, it's pretty apparent. But you can do Command or Control H to hide that selection so you can see. And sometimes it just has this cool effect, like there's an edge on that rock that's catching a bit of light. So you can really employ any hand-painted textures you want, or hand-painted texture like techniques, depending on how much you want to hand paint this, or you just want to do it with, Photoshop tools that you can do with a mouse. And sometimes I like to take a smudge tool, which mine has scattering applied to it, so really like obliterates edges like this. But you're really free after this base that we got down to tweak it and play with it any way that you want to. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot you can do with adjustment layers, and then there's a lot you can do with kind of manual tools, which gets more into that hand-painted type of territory. So remember, the brush can go past that seam. So really what I would do from here is just clean up those edges that I missed, and then I think we have a pretty cool texture. But for that, or with that, I'm out of time. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I do appreciate it. Hopefully this was helpful. This was a fun challenge I was looking forward to. I'll see all your designs on the Discord, so make sure to join that, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another one. Thanks, everybody.